Here we go. We're starting. Well, I'm excited today. I have the legend, Glen Van Peski. All right, we got to start with that first because I called you the legend right off the bat. Tell me where this legend originated from.
Well, in the long distance hiking community, there's a tradition. You pick up a trail name, and it's typically assigned to you. And I've had a number of trail names over the years. I answer most often to G squared. But a while ago, some people that I hike with a lot started calling me the legend, and I, at least in their circle, have not been able to shake that one.
I love it. I've had a few hikers on, and I had some section hikers who are hiking the Appalachian Trail, little sections at a time each year, and they're a bunch of housewives, and so they kind of gave each other names, trail names. So I didn't really know that was a thing till I talked to her, and then I was reading your book, and it said, "Oh, the legend." I like how you said that though. You don't assign that to yourself. You're not calling yourself the legend. These are people assigning it to you.
Exactly. Yeah, that's kind of tradition on trail names is I'm sure, there's different versions, but typically you can refuse to accept a trail name, although sometimes that's hard if everyone starts calling you by that name. And there's people, like when I enter people in my contacts, I put their trail name in because sometimes I don't really know their real name. I just know them by their trail name. So if I'm looking for them, it's like, what's their real name? It's like, oh yeah, it's POD, it's like Princess of Darkness. So, she's in there under that.
I love it. Well, that's great. Well, I appreciate you having you on. I start off a little different. You usually say, hey, welcome. And then, kind of ask about who you are. I wanted to throw that in there because I kind of got, when I first started reading your book, I was like, oh, he's the legend, Glen Van Peski. So I wanted to start with that. But Glen, thanks for joining me today. Can you, first of all, give us a little background on who you are, where you're from, that sort of thing. And then I'm going to dive into quite a few things. We'll see where we go.
Sure. No, thanks for having me on. Appreciate it. I am a retired civil engineer. I worked in land development, currently live in Bend, Oregon, lived on the East Coast for a lot, grew up in California for big periods of time. But yeah, along the way, I accidentally started a backpacking company, was almost killed in a plane crash, but basically I've had kind of a unremarkable life, but having a good time in Bend, Oregon. And I recently wrote a book. That's kind of why I'm doing the podcast thing. I was bugged by people for a long time to write a book and finally gave in and wrote it. So here we are.
And I love it. I'm excited to dive into it more. I just started reading it. The title is Take Less, Do More, with the idea kind of behind your whole backpacking and taking things light. Can you kind of just give me just a little background on the book itself?
Sure. So I've worked for probably about 50 years. If you start, when I graduated high school in 1976, I rode my bicycle across the country, 4,200 miles. Yeah, I know you're shaking your head. I shake my head when I think about it. It's like, what was I thinking? I was like 17, hopped on a bicycle and no helmet, no cell phones. We were using paper maps. There was no way to research anything. This was no internet, obviously. Start pedaling and talk to people. And it was an awesome, awesome trip. Still to this day, like the longest continuous adventure I've had, almost 50 years ago. But so I've been working to lighten my load. On that trip, I cut my toothbrush in half and I sewed myself some gear, sewed myself a tarp and a little net to go around my hammock. And then when our oldest son, Brian, joined Boy Scouts, the gear was real heavy. And so, it's a long story, but I started sewing gear and really thinking about how to lighten my own load. And so you may know this from other backpackers you've talked to, but there's a term called base pack weight, which is basically everything you're not wearing, not counting food and water, because that varies on the, where you're hiking and how many days you're out. But all your gear, your pack, your sleeping pad, your sleeping bag, your tent, cooking gear, extra insulation, everything like that, first aid. And my base pack weight is down to generally around 5 pounds. So I've worked at it. I've done less than that. I've done under 3 pounds. But yeah, I've worked at it. And over the years, I realized that some of the lessons I learned for reducing my base pack weight had broader applications to the rest of life. And that's kind of the general premise of the book is what I learned through backpacking that applies to the rest of life.
Love that. I love that concept about it. And 5 pounds, 3 pounds. And I'm not a packer, so I don't know. I'm not a backpacker. That sounds really light to me. I feel like I could put a couple things in and I'd be already at that weight or more.
Yeah, it's pretty, I mean, if you get your base weight down to 10 pounds, you're doing well. Most people be happy with that. I mean, I still remember breaking 12 pounds on a particular trip. So yeah, obviously it gets harder the lower you go. And, that includes gear that I've made myself, gear that's no longer made, and basically kind of the lightest of everything you can buy.
All right. You kind of talked about this 4,200-mile bike ride you did from, I think it was Massachusetts to California after you graduated high school. That in itself is an adventure. Kind of give me the background on that. How long did it take you? And it was just you and some buddies? Like, what was the situation behind this?
Yeah, I decided to do it. And then I was kind of talking among my friends, and three buddies decided to join me. And the exciting thing is, like, thanks to the marvel of the internet, I'm in touch with those guys, and we're talking about doing a 50-year anniversary trip going the other way, the complete the loop trip. So I'm excited about that. Still kind of enrolling the wife in that idea. But yeah, we're working on that. Yeah, I have no idea like why I thought it would be a good idea. I was not particularly adventurous in high school. Growing up, we did camping, but it was like national parks, camping with a campground, and you got the Coleman lantern, the Coleman stove, and doing day hikes and stuff. I fell in love with that smell of being outside with the fresh air and the big pine trees and the sun on the ground. And yeah, so I don't know. For me, I thought I was in the outing club in high school, and we did a trip from Western Massachusetts down to the Cape Cod and back. So I'd done, some smaller kind of bike packing trips. No, I don't know what possessed me to bicycle across the country.
And what did your family think? Were your parents supportive of this? Were they like, what is he doing?
Yeah, my mom was fine, great, have a good time. Her thoughts on child raising were, and she swears she never said this, but all three of us kids somehow picked this up, talking to my brother and my sister, that when you were 18, you left home, that she had given you all the tools you needed to make your way in life. And it was time for you to leave the nest and figure out what your life was going to look like. And so I think that was a piece of it. I mean, I left on that bicycle trip and never came back. I stayed on the West Coast. So that was kind of me leaving the nest. So that was a piece of it. And, when I think about the planning or lack of planning, I mean, this was when you could go into a gas station and get free paper maps. And so we got a map of the country and we knew where we were. And we just kind of took a blue highlighter and did a line across the country. And that was like the extent of our planning. And then we would get to a new state. We'd stop at a gas station, pick up the map for that state and kind of look at our blue line map and look at the state highways and stuff and figure out, well, this is pretty close, and, make our way across that state. So
did you ever have any moments, as a 17, 18-year-old biking across the country where you were like, what am I doing? Why am I doing this?
I don't remember that. And it's funny how selective your memory is. I didn't keep any notes. I don't know what I was thinking. Probably the paper and pen would be heavy or something. I don't know. But one of the guys had had the wherewithal to, as he puts it, I had the feeling this was going to be like a pretty big thing in my life and might like to have some record of it. So we have his record, including meticulous accounting of where we spent money, which was just fascinating look at what things cost 50 years ago. Yeah, I don't know. But it was great. I don't remember any thoughts of reading through his journal. There was a lot more rain than I remember. Like, I don't remember. And riding a bike all day in the rain is miserable. But somehow I don't remember it. But reading his journal, like, yeah, it rained today. It's like, man, I don't remember that. It was just the adventure. I remember the people we met along the way. Yeah, no, it was a good time.
It's the adventure of it all. And that's a question I like to ask. Sometimes I wait till the end of the podcast, but I want to ask that now because you decided to do this. For you now, and thinking back to all the adventures you've been on, you've done a lot of things. You've done a lot of hiking and things like that, biking and all sorts of stuff. But what does adventure mean to you?
Adventure to me is getting to a place. I like my wilderness less curated. Being out there with less gear is part of that. But putting yourself in a situation where you don't control all the variables. And I mean, we never control all the variables, but you plan as best you can based on your research and your experience. But ultimately, anytime you're in the wilderness, things happen. and you have to solve those problems with your skills and the gear that you have. And I like that. I think maybe that's just the engineer part of me. But I think it makes us doing hard things is important for us as humans. I don't know if you've read The Comfort Crisis by
No.
Michael Easter. I give a lot of those away. It's the short version is we've done too good a job as humans of making our life comfortable, and it's killing us. And it's important for us to do hard things, to push ourselves really hard occasionally. He talks about planning a trip or a challenge where you only have like a 50% chance of success. Not that you're going to die if you fall into the wrong 50%, trying to do like a rim to rim to rim or something without being trained for it. It's like, yeah, I might be able to do it, 50-50, something like that. But he talks about the importance of being just in the wilderness, being unplugged for, one on a daily basis for like 20 minutes, just as a reset, on a monthly basis for something over 3 days where you just get a chance. There's something magic about 3 days being unplugged as your brain stops thinking about all the emails that are piling up and the things on your to-do list, because you can't do any of them. You don't have cell coverage, and you're just out there letting your mind wander and just being. And that's something we don't do enough of in our modern world.
No, you're absolutely right. I remember years ago going on a cruise, and it didn't have internet access. And so that was great. My phone didn't work, nothing. And now you go on cruises and they have internet access. So it's just like, dang it,
Yeah.
we're losing out. Everywhere we turn, we're losing out on these moments.
Yeah, you're still plugged in. And so that's one of the magic of wilderness is it's, if you go backpacking, it's still at least rare when I go that usually you don't have cell phone coverage at the trailhead, and it's, you might get it here and there on a peak, but other than that, you're unplugged.
For you, Glenn, do you have any particular trails that you've just really love, that you enjoy? I mean, I know there's some famous ones. I know there's, the Pacific Crest Trail, there's Continental Divide, you got Appalachian. Is there any for you that you just absolutely love?
Well, I love being outside in general, and I'm not too picky. If I have to choose, the mountains kind of near or above tree line is really where my heart sings. But really anywhere in the West, I have this theory, there's kind of like, you're kind of born a Westerner and Easterner, and the place you're actually born isn't necessarily who you are, it's like, but just something about the West and the wide open spaces, driving across Wyoming and Montana and the big mountains, it just makes my heart sing. And I think people in the West are just different in the East. And I've spent a lot of time in both places, and not that one's better, but it's just the wide open spaces and the big sky makes my heart sing.
Love that. All right, a couple other things that I read about you that you talked about. One, you talked about walking away from a plane crash. Kind of that's pretty incredible. And I don't know how many kind of give me the situation. What happened with this plane crash?
Yeah, I guess that's one thing that maybe not a lot of people have experienced. When I was building my career and in business, I was always working on personal development, reading books, listening to cassette tapes back in the day. And I got involved in like a kind of leadership, personal development course, some lectures, and a group of us went to a week-long seminar up in Northern California. And one of the guys had just gotten his pilot's license. And I had my pilot's license. I had, I don't know, under 100 hours. He had a few more than that. And so he said, well, let's rent a plane and fly up there, because there was actually a airfield on this conference site. So we thought that'd be great. We're young bucks and feeling like we're flying in our own plane. This is going to be awesome. So we were coming back from that seminar, and we stopped in San Francisco and got a cab to, the piers there, had a nice dinner, and just feeling like, this is great, living the life here. And then we got back in the plane, and it's getting dark as we fly down the coast to Orange County destination. That's where we'd flown out of. A couple of us had driven up from San Diego, and it's getting dark, and the pilot, there are 2 gas tanks, one in each wing on the plane. And, I noticed when one tank went dry and he switched to the other one. because I had my pilot's license, so I was kind of aware of those things. And we're flying along, and I saw him switch back, because he'd run out of gas in the second tank. And the minute I saw him switching back to the tank that I already knew was empty, that was my clue. It's like, this is not going to end well. This is going to be messy. So we landed, he landed without power, almost made it to a nearby airport, Meadowlark, it was a small private landing strip, been there for years. And they built up homes around it. So they were shutting the lights off at night, so it didn't disturb the people that lived adjacent to it now. And we couldn't find the transponder code to click on the lights. But he still got within spitting distance almost of the fence, missed some houses going in, and went in through some trees that took off the wings. So we landed very hard on the ground, right side up, and blew the doors off. And I went unconscious, but then was the first one to come to. And when I called out, I got no answer. So, my first thought was, wow, I could be the sole survivor of this crash. And I got out of the tent, or out of the plane, which was easy because there were no doors anymore. And I was looking at Bill, who'd been sitting in the co-pilot seat in front of me. And I was still thinking, I should get people away from the plane, worried about fire, not thinking that, well, with no fuel, probably not, your brain's not, or my brain wasn't working at full capacity in that situation. And I remember I could barely stand. My legs were like jelly from shock. And I thought, well, how am I can like barely hold myself up. How am I going to get Bill out of the plane? But I, got him out of the plane, laid him down on the grass. And by that time, the first responders were there, fire truck and ambulance and stuff. And so my wife got a call from the hospital saying, you need to drive to the hospital up in Orange County and bring someone with you. There's been a crash. And she said, is my husband alive? She says, well, I can't tell you, so she had to get a neighbor, drive up. We had young kids. She had to get someone to watch the kids and drive up there, not knowing, like stewing the whole drive up. Like, am I a widow and just don't know it yet? So yeah, that was a hard time.
And so you survived, obviously.
Yeah.
Was it just you and Bill, or was there somebody else with you?
No, there were 5 of us. The pilot, who had just been married 6 months, did not survive the crash.
Wow.
Even though his piloting ensured that the rest of us survived.
Yeah.
And so, one of the things as a result of that is, I never leave my wife without telling her I love her, because I don't assume that I'm coming back. I mean, I plan on that.
For sure.
But after that crash, I realized that that's not a guarantee. I was hoping that the pilot and his young wife, had left on good terms. I mean, so yeah, kind of changed the way I look at things.
No, for sure. And I'm guessing your wife was probably panicked, not knowing what's going on.
Well, yeah, and that was the start of, we had a very hard time. The plane crashed, the economy tanked, my business went under. I worked for a year without salary. Our second son was born severely disabled. She was pregnant with him when I was in the plane crash. He was born severely disabled. So yeah, that was the start of a rough time.
Wow. A rough stretch.
Yeah.
Let's stick on the
20-year rough stretch.
Well, let's stick on the topic of your family for a little bit, because I know your wife, Francie, is that her name?
Yeah, Francie, yeah.
And you guys have been married, 40 plus years?
Over 42 years now, yeah.
Very good. What's that relationship been like? How's it evolved over the years?
It's, if you look at the divorce rates for things that happen to couples, like couples that have endured a bankruptcy or failure of a business, it's like over 90%. The birth of a disabled child is like 85, 90%. The death of a child is, 90%. And we've survived all those. So there's really no good reason we should still be married. Except Francie's pretty stubborn. I'm sure that's a part of it. But yeah, it's, we got married, I was 23, I think, 23, 24. So, yeah, I mean, I look at our kids at that age, it's like, oh my gosh, it's like we knew nothing. And so we essentially grew up together pretty quickly in some areas. So yeah, it's when we moved to Bend 7 years ago and we decided to build a house, people would say, oh, building a house, that's a strain on a marriage. And Francie would just laugh. She goes, oh, man, with what we've been through, it's like, that does not even move the needle for us. It's like, yeah.
Wow. Okay. So yeah, bankruptcy, a business that failed, handicapped child. Yeah. So I want to see Brian, Grant, and Derek. Those are your three sons.
Huh?
And so Derek was the one physically handicapped, correct? And he passed away.
Yeah, he passed away shortly before his 20th birthday on Mother's Day.
Wow, on Mother's Day. So yeah, what was the story behind that, if you don't mind sharing that with us?
Sure. Derek was born, he had hydrocephalus that was developed in utero. And so basically it prevented the circulation of spinal fluid through his brain. So his brain didn't develop. All he had was a brain stem. He basically had, his skull was filled with fluid. And so he had to be C-section because his head was enlarged. He required countless surgeries to fix the hydrocephalus. And, he was severely disabled. He was like a newborn. Even as his body grew, we fed him initially. Francie would feed him with a bottle. It would take hours and hours, and he had a very strong gag reflex. So you could spend 2 or 3 hours feeding him a bottle, and then on the last sip, he would throw it all up, and you'd have to start all over. So huge stress on Francie. About this time, my business, I'm working long hours, and then the business failed. It was a super hard time. And then Grant was born, and so Francie had like 2 newborns to take care of. So yeah, we eventually got Derek placed, and that's a whole long story. They took really good care of him. It was actually a state institution up in Orange County, Fairview, and we would pop in on him all hours of the day. They always asked you to like, hey, call and tell us when you're going to be here. And Francie's like, we'll just pop in, because you want to see what happens when they don't have notice. And he was always, in great condition, taken great care of. He didn't know us. He responded to voices. He couldn't see because he didn't have the brain to interpret that. He had a feeding tube put in, so he could get nourishment. But he enjoyed kind of music. He enjoyed sound, and he was aware of voices. You could see him tracking. Couldn't understand anything, obviously. And he liked movement. You could put him in his wheelchair and like spin him around. And he'd start just laughing hysterically. Yeah, he had he never knew enough that he was disabled. He was just living his life,
Doing his thing.
Yeah.
For you as a father, a husband, the provider for your family, and you're struggling, your business failing, what did you do? How did you overcome that for yourself? Because I know for me as, the man of the family, so to speak, that's a stress, and it's tough mentally. How do you overcome that?
Yeah. It was hard. And Derek was hard because as an engineer, a guy in general, we're used to solving problems, okay, problem, let's figure out what are the inputs, what are the outputs, how do we get there? How do we solve this problem? And, Derek, in a way, I couldn't make him undisabled. I couldn't, that was something I couldn't fix. And, later on as the economy's tanking and development's going away, Francie would ask me, do I need to go back to work? I'm like, no. We had some savings, and, next month, do I need to go back to work? No. Finally, she says, I'm going back to work. So the kids were a little older. She started driving up to UCLA to do a couple of 12-hour nursing shifts and then driving back just to make it through that time. And then I ended up taking a job with another company, after folding my own engineering company. So yeah, luckily we live cheap. So we were able to get by, but yeah, that's hard.
No doubt. And I think your book kind of reflects some of that, having less, and it could be material, but it doesn't have to be, I think, either. I think it'd be more than that. Kind of tell me a little bit about that, because I know a big thing too, and that I've read from you just in other aspects, is the gratitude that you have. And how do you, when you're struggling, you're going through all that, how do you find that gratitude?
It could always be worse. That's the thing. Yes, maybe I haven't been able to take a salary in 10 months, but we're living in a house, we have electricity, we have running water. There's no shortage of examples, if you open your eyes, to people in other parts of the world that are living a basically Stone Age existence, through no fault of their own, war and famine. And so it's all relative. I mean, we have such a rich life here, but we're constantly exposed to people that have so much more. It's easy to think like, oh, well, my life is hard. It's like, well, take a step back and really put it in a global perspective. And I think that's one thing that ultralight backpacking really helps to reset. When we're in our nice, comfy homes and they're set to the temperature we like, and we're never too cold, never too hot, and we've got drinking water in multiple locations at any temperature we want, even though, maybe we're frustrated that it takes so long for the shower to get hot. There's nothing like a couple of weeks of sleeping on the ground, hiking in the rain, treating your water, going thirsty because you thought there'd be water at the next source and there wasn't, or drinking out of a cow trough because that's all you have and you need the water. There's nothing like some time with minimal gear to really reset your expectations. It gives you new appreciation, but it also gives you an understanding that your basic needs really aren't as many as you think they are. I can go out with 5 pounds of gear and I'm safe. I'm enjoying life. I have everything I need. And so really anything more than that is extra. It's not necessary. And it's easy to forget that in the world we live in. It's like, you're on a plane ride and it's like, there's no internet. It's like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. It's like, really? It's like, yeah, just take a step back and think about it. So that's one of the lessons from ultralight backpacking is it helps reset your gratitude and just gives you a bigger understanding of how little you actually need to be happy.
And kind of staying on that same page of ultralight backpacking, because you've got kind of that engineer mind. You're kind of thinking of ways, how do I make this lighter? How to make things better, more efficient? You've come up with a gear company, correct? What's the name of the company? And then kind of what's going on with that?
Gossamer Gear is the name of the company. I mean, it started as GVP Gear. I just used my initials.
Okay.
And this started, so my mom also, besides thinking that every kid should leave home when they were 18, also thought that every kid should know how to cook, bake, and sew when they left home. She just considered those like basic life skills. And so all three of us know how to do all three of those. And so when our son Brian joined Scouts and we went down to REI to gear up for the kind of the capstone backpacking trip, was a week in the High Sierra. And so they loaded us up. I mean, we had the internal frame packs were the new thing. So I got this big internal frame pack and, inflatable sleeping pads and big down sleeping bags. We had, an MSR stove and the old, white gas container and tent and everything. And our packs, my pack, when we left on that trip with food and water for a week, weighed over 70 pounds, which I was younger then. It's a good thing. That would kill me today. I can't even believe that. And about this time, Ray Jardine wrote his book, The Pacific Crest Trail Hiker's Handbook. And he talked about hiking the Pacific Crest Trail and sewing his own gear and a base weight of around 8 pounds. So my friend Reed Miller, who was the scoutmaster of the troop and also a buddy of mine through he's a developer, he read Ray Jardine's book, The Pacific Crest Trail Hiker's Handbook. Jardine talks about doing hiking the Pacific Crest Trail with his wife Jenny and having a 8-pound base pack weight. So Reed decides to section hike the Pacific Crest Trail. So he's a little older than I am. He decides, we're going to go lightweight. This is going to be great. We can help the scouts because a lot of them, when they come into scouts, they're young, 13, 14. You can't load them up with that kind of weight and expect them to have any kind of a good experience in the backcountry. So since I knew how to sew, the internal frame pack that they'd sold me at REI weighed 7.5 pounds empty. So I thought that's probably a good place to start. So I ordered some fabric. Francie still remembers she gets home from the store and I've moved the table and I've got fabric stretched out on the living room floor and I'm marking it up, measuring with a yardstick and marking up. She says, "What are you doing?" She said, I'm making myself a backpack. She goes, okay, whatever. So I made myself a pack. And then, I'd use that pack on scout trips. And like you said, I'm an engineer. I kept thinking like, oh, this is okay, but it'd be better if, I did this, that, and the other. So I made another pack, and then I made a third pack. And by the time I made my fourth pack, I thought, this is good. I think this works for the way I backpack right now, and is the best I can get. And so people started calling it the G4 just because my name starts with G. And this was early internet days, and there was kind of an ultralight backpacking listserv, actually a PCT listserv. The word kind of got out, and so I put the plans, such as they were, I just kind of sketched them up and put them on the internet so people could make their own. And I kept getting calls from people saying, hey, I don't know how to sew, and I don't know anyone that knows how to sew. Could you make me a pack? At this point, I'm like working 70 hours a week on the engineering, and it takes me about 10 hours to buy the fabric, measure everything out, sew it up. And so I was like, no, there's no way I'm making you a pack. But I got enough requests. I felt bad for these people. It was unfortunate their moms hadn't taught them how to sew before they left home. And so I was talking to Quest Outfitters, the sisters in Florida that I ordered fabric from, and they said, well, there's this cut and sew shop on your coast up in Seattle. Maybe they could make a few packs for you. So they gave me the contact info. I got a hold of Monty up in Seattle, and he says, oh yeah, our minimum order is 100. And I'm like, whoa, I need about 25 packs, and everyone who's bugging me will have one, and I can go back to the engineering, and that'll be that. And so we went back and forth and finally settled on 50. I thought, they'll be in my garage for the next 5 years, but I'll eventually get rid of them. So sent him up a pack and, went back and forth until he could make the pack that I had designed. And our son, Brian, put up like a rudimentary website where people could, fill out an order for him, and it would send me an email with their details. The initial G4s were offered in one size and 4 different colors, which I have no idea why I thought like color was more important. Maybe I thought, well, it's easy to change the color. It's just different fabrics. Like I only have the pattern in one size that fits me, and I'm 6'4". So I have no idea those early customers probably didn't fit any of them. I have no idea. And so I go, I'm busy working on my engineering, and suddenly one day I get a email, and it's my first order. It's like, oh man, what do I do? So I grabbed I had a pad of yellow lined paper on my desk. I grabbed it and wrote down the order, and I still have, these are those yellow line.
Nice.
That's the piece of paper I grabbed to start writing down orders.
Classic.
I wrote down the order, wrote down each line had like the person's name. And then I put a check mark when their check arrived, because we didn't have any, payment system set up. This was early days. And you don't put systems in place if you think you're just going to sell 25 packs. It's like, you don't worry about a fancy company name. You just call it your initials and piece of paper, and people mail their checks. It's like, yeah, this will be fine. This will be over in a couple months here. It wasn't. I had 86 orders before I got my first shipment, and then we had to order more fabric, and then it just went on from there.
Gossamer, what's it called again? Gossamer Gear?
Gossamer Gear.
Gossamer Gear.
And it was always a side gig. I mean, I've never taken a salary from the company, because I just never, I don't know, it might have been fun. I didn't figure it was fair to my family. I didn't want to gamble my mortgage and my kids' college education on it. So
just kept it as a side hustle.
Yeah.
I like it. So someone else, I'm guess, runs the company, and you're just kind of involved still. Is that kind of how it works?
Yeah. It got to a point where I was going to close it down, because I was working 60, 70 hours a week doing the engineering, and then another 30 hours a week doing the gear business. And I was making, good money doing the engineering and no money on the gear business. So if one was going to go, it's pretty obvious which one it had to be. So about this time, I had joined the board of the Pacific Crest Trail Association to kind of give back. And at one of the meetings, we were talking about, new board members. And Henry Shires of Tarp Tent brought up, what about John Mackey? He does a lot of hiking. And I said, who's John Mackey? And he said, co-founder of Whole Foods Market. And John is a very big hiker, among other things. And Anyway, so we set up a meeting to meet him in Boulder and pitch him on becoming a board member. And by this time, I had a little bit of a reputation for having a light pack. And so John's a super gear guy. So he was interested in talking to me. That was kind of the reason he agreed to meet. And so we met, had a nice dinner. The executive director, Liz Bergeron, and I pitched John. A couple weeks later, I get back and I'd come to the decision that I had to close down the gear company. And Liz calls me up and says, "Hey, you were the bait. You need to close the deal, follow up with Mackie and get him to join the board." So I called up John and asked him if he wanted to join the board. And he said, no. He's very successful guy, obviously. And one of the reasons he does that is, saying no to things that don't have his name on them. I was just hiking with him the other day and he said, I forget how it came up, but he says, I asked myself, is this something I need to do? Like, am I the one that has to do this? And if the answer is no, it's like, well, let someone else do it because there's stuff that only I can do. And that's the stuff that I need to be doing. So anyway, he said no. And I said, oh, by the way, I'm going to close down the gear company. So, if you're going to order anything, do it in the next week or two. And he said, I'm leaving on a hike. Don't do anything till I get back. And so he calls me, a day or two later and says, okay, I got a proposal for you. I will buy 75% of the company. I think it's important that you maintain ownership and that you're involved, but you can be as involved or uninvolved as you want. I'll hire someone to run it. I'll put money into, rent an office and pay salaries. And so that's how we ended up to the Gossamer Gear today. Otherwise it would have been a footnote in history.
Yeah, well, and you would have just shut it down and that would have been it.
Yeah, that would have been it.
Selling the company, hey, get something out of it and you're still going to be involved with it.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't see any downside,
Yeah.
I mean, he paid me $100,000 for 75%, which didn't change my lifestyle. But, really, I mean, the things I've gotten out of Gossamer Gear haven't been monetary. One, the relationship with John Mackie and the hikes I've gone on with him and, his friends and just being around that much wisdom and experience on a regular basis is huge. And then, with the gear company, I get to travel to fun places. We were in Japan to speak at an event and meet with dealers, and I'm going to the Netherlands in the spring to speak at an event there. So yeah, the people and the places are the fun part.
Yeah, and I'm going to ask about that because as we're kind of wrapping up here. Yeah, where do you think what does the future hold for you? What more adventures do you want to do as well?
I've been thinking about that. A buddy of mine just got a brain tumor and he's super healthy, a big hiker. And he's doing some things to prolong his time left. But, basically he's got, call it a couple of years. It's really made me think kind of back to the plane crash, it's like your future isn't guaranteed. It's like, yeah, what would be on my list? If I knew things were coming to an end, if I had a couple of years, like which of the items would I want to do more of? Which things would I stop doing? I mean, there's a never ending list of things. I don't know if I have it. So for 2025, I'm an engineer. I'm going to put together a big list of like possibilities. We couldn't do them all, and there's check marks. Is this like a Glen and Francie thing or just a Glen thing? And Francie's less of a planner. She just prefers to kind of let things unfold. So, we've gotten a few things like with check marks, like, yes, we're definitely doing this. A couple things like, okay, this isn't going to fit into this year. We'd like to do New Zealand sometime, rent a camper van and bum around there for a couple of weeks. And we're talking about taking our Sprinter van on the Dempster Highway in Alaska. That's not on the not list yet, so that may happen. I mean, we love Europe and Italy. There's backpacking events. Yeah, we like a mix. We like, overseas travel. We just actually, at the time of this list, that I first made this list, I don't know, we joined a local kind of club and they're doing a wine cruise. That sounds fun. That wasn't on the list, so now we're doing that. Some friends of ours are booked like hiking on the Camino for a week in Spain. And it's like, I don't know, it's probably not the way I'd hike it and probably not the section I'd hike, but they're good friends and it'll be a blast, So it's like, okay, well, let's do that. So we're kind of very opportunistic, things come up when you have fun friends, it's like fun opportunities come up. And my pack is always packed. I could be, probably out the door in a couple hours if I wanted to for a trip. And there's trips I try and do that too. I usually get permits for 2 to 3 trips a year and just send it out to a group of people that I have to see who can make it. So I try and create those trips and not just take advantage of other people's trip creation.
Love it. This has been fascinating. I really appreciate who you are, kind of what you're doing. Tell everybody where they can find the book and what's the best way to get your book.
Probably best bet. I mean, the book is anywhere you buy books. Your local bookseller can order for you if they don't already have it. Amazon, all the online places, of course. You can find out something about the book and about me at glenvanpeski.com. I have lots of tips and tricks there, backpacking and otherwise, eccentric, other materials, some videos. Yeah, you can sign up for my newsletter. I only do it every couple of weeks, and I'm thinking I may make it less frequent than that because maybe that's something I don't enjoy doing as much as some other things.
Very good. So my final question for you then is, someone who likes to backpack, you've only got one opportunity, you got like a week left, and you've only got one place to backpack. Where are you going and why?
For me, I'd be in the mountains, somewhere up above tree line, some trail, some cross country route finding, probably somewhere in the West. I don't know. It would depend. Could be Europe, but I don't know. I like the here where you can camp anywhere. It's less curated. You can just be out there.
Love it. Glen, thank you so much for coming on Journey with Jake.
Jake, thanks for having me. It's been a great journey.
Awesome. Let me hit stop here.